Hi, I'm Marty Nemko, and this is Gardening Tips for Smart People. Gardening is every person's hobby. It's the most popular hobby in America, so much of the advice that's been written is aimed at the grand middle. These tips are for people who'd like to use an above-average amount of noggin. First, in choosing a species or varieties, what you want to plant. Your subjective preferences may end up trumping everything else in terms of other factors, but if you want to be rational about considering what to grow, it involves consciously deciding over the plant's lifespan which plants will yield you the most pleasure for the effort and cost expended. Now, subsumed in that might be the prettiness, what they call the form of the bloom, if that's a flowering plant. For example, many people consider a spiral-centered hybrid tea rose the most beautiful. For example, you might see a photo about this rose called Sheer Elegance. You can Google that and you'll see it's gorgeous. You also might want to consider, in terms of what plants to plant, what I call the percent annual attractiveness. The theoretical maximum is that 100% of the plant is attractive 100% of the year. The minimum annual attractiveness is just that a tiny bit of the plant is attractive for just a few days a year. One example of a high attractiveness plant, at least in where I live in the frost-free warm climes of California, is an orange tree. During a couple months that an orange tree is in fruit, you have attractive oranges dotting the tree. For another month, it's in bloom, liberally laced with white, fragrant flowers. And when not in fruit or flower, the whole rest of the year, because it's evergreen, it's still always covered with, in this case, lush, deep green foliage and a plant habit that's your classic tree, a solid trunk and a rounded symmetrical canopy covered with leaves. There are other plants, though, that have high average annual attractiveness, that have low care, and they'll be more applicable for the rest of the country. And that includes annuals, such as marigolds or zinnias for sunny spots, or impatiens for shade. And all those have the additional bonus of being cheap. You can get a 6-pack of those for $3 or $4. Of course, also in choosing what kind of plants to plant, you want to talk about the degree, or think about the degree of care required. For example, before planting roses, require you to dig out an 18-inch cube of soil and replace half of it with some sort of compost. Plus, roses require one major pruning and 2 or 3 minor thorny prunings during the year. In contrast, the Japanese maple requires virtually no pruning. Now, I happen to enjoy pruning enough that I have a few roses in my garden. Of course, I do live in the San Francisco Bay Area, where roses bloom 9 months out of the year. In most parts of the U.S., roses bloom for just 3 or 4 months, and they're more subject to disease. Unless your idea of fun is wearing a spray mask and releasing pesticides and fungicides into the environment, avoid plants that need to be sprayed, like apple trees, cherry trees, and peach trees. And most roses require spraying, but I carefully choose disease-resistant varieties which, without spraying, look okay. For example, the aforementioned Sheer Elegance and a rose I love called Black Magic. But my roses aren't going to be winning any rose shows. But the price of perfection for most recreational gardeners is simply too great. Except for tomatoes, the food value of a plant should generally be a minor consideration. Relative to the effort, the taste or the cost saving versus store-bought is just too small. Also, in choosing what to plant, you want to focus not only on the species, but which particular variety within the species. There's great variation within a species. For example, within the aforementioned tomatoes, traditionalists might value the historicity and untampered with organicity of heirloom tomatoes, the most popular of which are Brandywine and Cherokee Purple. But many people, maybe most people, prefer to buy varieties with the greater yield and disease resistance of modern hybrids. Now, these are not genetically modified. They're just the old-fashioned Mendelian crossings, many of which taste as good, if not, and really most of them really do taste better than most heirlooms, and have a lot bigger yield. For example, you've got the large-fruited Big Beef terrific tomato and the cherry tomato, which is the best-tasting tomato I've ever eaten, called Orange Peruche, P-A-R-U-C-H-E. Now, many thinker types find it fun to read lots of reviews and assess pros and cons of various varieties of a particular plant, like types of tomatoes or zinnias or whatever. Start with the product descriptions and buyer reviews on the popular seed websites, because they have a large enough user base to provide a decent number of reviews. Also, those larger sites tend to have enough of a research crew to have carefully curated varieties. I use the generalist websites parkseed.com and harrisseeds.com. And for my specialties of interest, a specialty seed or plant website. For example, TotallyTomatoes.com, which sells tomato seeds, obviously. ReganNursery.com, which sells rose plants. And VioletBarn.com for African violets. They sell small plants. By the way, I like African violets because it's a house plant that blooms much of the year with little effort. Before buying, I'm also going to probably typically, because I find it fun, to additionally look for more user reviews using a Google search. Now let's talk about care. You can increase your pleasure to effort ratio by being efficient in your watering and feeding. An automatic watering system is usually a drip system, and a fertilizer injector, such as a $65 Easy Flow EZ-FLO, which you can get on Amazon, saves enormous time. Now, the specific fertilizer usually isn't that critical. A balanced fertilizer used on all your plants usually gets you almost as good a result as if you use different fertilizers for different plants. The pH in most soils, I'll talk briefly about pH. The pH of most soils, that's the acidic versus basic characteristic of the soil, is fine for most plants. But there are a few, if you really love blueberries or azaleas or rhododendrons, they like acid soil. If those are your favorites, it may be worth the effort to just buy out a little bag of the readily available acid fertilizers that are specifically designed for those plants. And finally, I want to talk about hybridizing. After a while, many thinking gardeners lament a particular plant's liabilities, and that was true with me with roses. Roses are a 9-month-a-year flower factory, but they're prone to fungal diseases. So I decided to try my hand at hybridizing roses for disease resistance. I didn't take any courses. I simply read an Introduction to Rose Hybridizing booklet. I dug up an article on hybridizing roses for disease resistance. I visited 2 hybridizers to see what they do firsthand and ask them questions. And within just a few months after I had started this idea, I had started crossing the best disease-resistant varieties of rose with the varieties that were best overall, the prettiest flower and the best annual attractiveness. I actually used those miniature roses that you get in the supermarket that are covered with beautifully formed, gorgeous flowers. I then evaluated the seedlings that came from those crosses and submitted the best seedlings to a rose wholesaler, actually called Bailey's Nurseries in Minnesota. And 3 of my varieties are now in commerce, and I get a royalty check every year. I've since stopped hybridizing, but if I were to continue, in case you're interested, I'd probably take the best of those seedlings and cross them again with a super healthy variety, or simply cross the 2 best seedlings that I had created. The takeaway from all this, all careers, all hobbies can all be done at various levels, from the minimally intellectually challenging to quite intellectually challenging. And this article's purpose was to offer some tips for the brainy gardener, and I hope you enjoy. Thank you for watching. I am Marty Nemko, and by the way, this is part of a series of tips for smart people. All of them are on my blog here on my blog here on this YouTube channel, and the text of all of them is on PsychologyToday.com. Again, I'm Marty Nemko. Thanks again for watching.